Hello everyone and welcome back to Monsters of the Mind. As always, I'm your host Mr.G. Today we're talking about a cryptid that's pretty much a land-based electric eel. It's the Mongolian death worm. Mongolian death worm means deadly worm from Mongolia, and they were presumably a species since they're almost always talked about in plural. Now, I'm pretty sure that these would be considered malevolent since they're almost always known to attack unprovoked, I guess. I don't know, that's just what I think. It comes from the Gobi Desert and it's a Mongolian cryptid. Appearance-wise, the Mongolian death worm is often described as being a bright red or pink color and looking somewhat like an intestine, which is actually what led to its local name of the intestine worm. The Mongolian death worm, true to its name, is described as being very deadly, with it having poisonous skin, the ability to shoot venom, and according to some stories, it's even able to electrocute things. Although it had been known in Mongolia for quite a while, it was first brought to outside of Mongolia's attention when famous paleontologist Roy Chapman Andrews heard about the worm and described his experiences about hearing from it from a group of Mongolian officials. It should be noted, though, that he actually didn't believe in the worm, he was just telling the stories that he had heard. Okay, so what was it? Most people think that the Mongolian deathworm is actually just a snake. The most common pointed to is a species of Mongolian sand boas, mostly because when a group of Mongolian locals were shown this snake, they did confirm that that is what the moniker intestine worm was referring to. Some other people think the venom may have come from people who didn't know what spitting cobras are encountering one of them. Things like that. Basically, most people think that it might have just been a misidentified snake. Me personally, though, the thing that kills the idea of the death worm is the fact that it's electrical. While yes, there are indeed electrical animals out there, most famously the electric eel, you might notice that basically every animal that can attack with electricity is underwater, where such a power would actually be useful. The Mongolian death worm is described as being a burrowing animal, and sand is a terrible conductor of electricity. Even more unbelievable is the fact that some stories claim that it shoots these electricities in the form of electrical bolts. This is something that no known animal is capable of, and it's, by all accounts, biologically impossible to shoot straight-up bolts of electricity. You see, most electrical animals like electric eels or electric rays attack by creating sort of a barrier of electricity. They make like a quick pulse of electricity that creates a barrier for a few seconds, that's meant to stun their enemies and prey. Currently, none of these animals are able to shoot straight-up bolts of lightning. There's also the issue about how there have been no dead bodies, that despite their aggressive nature, we have not found a single dead body of either their prey or of the worm itself, and it lives in the deserts, which are pretty good at preserving dead bodies, since there's not a lot of predators and decomposition in the desert is incredibly slow. So, we should have found corpses that were killed by some sort of venom or corpses charred from electricity, something like that. Or we could have found a dead body of the worm. I mean, it's described as having poisonous flesh, so nothing would want to eat it, and like I said, decomposition in the desert's a pretty slow process. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents. What do you guys think these worms are? Now, here's Vincent. I've had a few encounters with the MDWs. Obviously I wasn't killed by any of them. I have to admit, those worms are kinda creepy looking. They do look exactly like intestines. And, yeah. As for their prey, they mostly hunt jackalopes, since, those are really the only thing available, and they're close enough in size so that the worm only really needs to eat them every once in a while. They have a surprisingly slow metabolism, so they don't need to eat that much. Now that we got that out of the way, let's look at the card. Now, this card is mostly fine, it describes its role quite well, but this card honestly kinda disturbs me. Mostly because of the feet. I know that most people don't think that the death worm was a true annelid, but, those feet just kinda put me on edge. I mean, I hate centipedes, and centipede-like feet kinda disturb me. This card also makes an incredibly dubious claim that I have yet to see anything else confirm. It claims that from 1929 to the 1990s, the Gobi Desert was off limits to anyone who wasn't Mongolian. This is a claim that I have not seen a single primary source for. In fact, I've read about Mongolian deathworms a few times, and I've only ever heard this bit of information repeated once. But I've looked into the Gobi Desert, I've looked into other Mongolian deathworm sources, I've looked into Mongolia, but I cannot find a single source that proves that this was a real law. It also claims that mentioning the deathworm itself was illegal, but again, I can't find any proof of that. I give this a 9 out of 10 for a very questionable claim. Now, the Mongolian deathworm is interesting because it has creatures inspired by it, but it doesn't appear as itself very often. The Tremor series has creatures called graboids, which are inspired by the worms. And the series Dune also has similar creatures that are inspired by the worms. The video game Ark features deathworms, and fun fact, their genus name is actually part of their local name that I mentioned earlier. That's all for this episode of Monsters of the Mind. Join me next time when I talk about an English folklore. I can't really think of a better way to describe it, because... you'll see next time. Bye!